The Huns began to straften, couldn't make it out at all. Especially when the tanks began the caterpillar crawl. And the tanks went on and they strolled along with an independent air. And their guns began to blare, and the Huns began to swear. But they pulled the trees up by the roots and made...
So, here I am still around the village where I'm doing bed and breakfast, and on the corner of the village, British cemetery. You know, you have to really give the Commonwealth War Graves Commission, they really do a good job of maintaining these graves, and it just so happens in this particular grave site, this cemetery, there is actually a member of B Battalion, and he died on the 20th of November. Let's try and find him. One, two, three, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 tanky gravestones here from the 20th of November, but I'm afraid none of them are from B Battalion. Let's keep looking, maybe we can find him. So, here he is, number 201722, Sergeant J. Whelan. That's Sergeant John Whelan, died on 20th November 1917, aged 27. He actually came from Liverpool. Don't know which company he was with, which tank he belonged to, I really don't know. What it says here at the top is it known to be buried in this cemetery. This cemetery was actually bombed a couple of times, and the remains have been lost. Just wait for this car to go by. Yeah, I was saying this cemetery was actually bombed. I don't know whether it was the First or Second World War, and a number of the actual remains couldn't be found anymore. So what they've done is they've placed a headstone for each of the fallen that they know to be buried here. Sergeant J. Whelan. Actually just around the corner from where I'm staying at my bed and breakfast. Rest peacefully, friend. So, before we go any further, let's take a quick look at the battalion organisation. I've actually moved into the back of my car now to explain this. And we'll start with the lowest denominator and work up. So here we have a single Mark IV male tank. That tank had 8 crewmen, a second lieutenant or a full lieutenant commander, the driver, 4 gunners and 2 gearsmen, so 8 in total. And that crew, they'd be working together all the time, working as a team, and they would have a designation, and that designation would be their battalion letter followed by 2 numbers. A crew could be B15, B35, B44, something like that. And when they were planning and they were discussing with each other who's going to do what or whatever, they would actually refer to that crew designation rather than the serial number of the vehicle. I think you could compare it to with the modern day system to the tank call sign. The tanks also had names, most of them, and the names had to start with the letter of their battalion. So this is B Battalion, so you'd have tanks that were called Black Prince, Buccaneer, something like that. A tank on its own is quite vulnerable on the battlefield. How it was the next step up was the tanks were organised into a section of 3. In this way they could provide mutual support for each other. And again, this principle developed in the First World War holds sound today. This section would have a section leader, and that would be a captain. And at Cambrai, the section leader would travel in the lead tank. So there's 9 guys in there with the section leader. Moving on from the section then, we'd actually have 4 sections that together is a company, and these would then work as an integrated unit with each other, and there would be a major in charge of the company. So here we are at the next stage, and what we have is 3 battle tank companies, and then by the B company it was number 4, number 5 and number 6. Those were the company designations for B Battalion at Cambrai. And this the battalion would actually be run by a Lieutenant Colonel. In the case of B Company, Lieutenant Colonel Bryce. So this is quite a formidable fighting force for 1917. Each of these tanks equipped with 2 6-pounders, 3 Lewis guns. That's quite a fighting force for 1917. But we're still not finished yet. There's still some more tanks to come. In addition to the 36 battle tanks in the 3 companies, there were also 4 additional tanks that were actually the battalion reserve. These tanks were prone to breaking down, so there had to be some sort of reserve. Each battalion should have been allocated 2 reserve tanks, but for some reason on the day only 4 tanks were issued to B Battalion. Some of the other battalions that took part in Cambrai, they did get their full quota of 6, but it just happens that B Battalion just didn't. So 4 reserve tanks. Then comes an additional 4 tanks, and these tanks had a special task. These tanks were wire pulling tasks, and they were normal male fighting tanks, but on the rear of the vehicle there was a grappling hook mounted, and the idea was that these tanks would follow behind the main force, and they would actually be clearing the barbed wire for a width of 50 yards all the way, following the battalion to allow the cavalry to come forward, because cavalry cannot ride over ground that is covered with barbed wire, so it had to be cleared. And in advance of Cambrai, technique was developed using these grappling hooks to clear a way through the barbed wire using these tanks. These tanks, even though they were allocated to B Battalion, they actually came under brigade command. All the wire pulling tanks came under came under brigade command. So that's the wire pullers. And as lastly, we have 2 other tanks. These tanks were supply tanks. The records seem to show, I should say, that all the supply tanks at Cambrai were actually female tanks. So instead of the 6-pounder, they would actually have Lewis machine guns. So these tanks were just equipped with Lewis machine guns. These tanks were actually known by the lads as top towers, and they were known as top towers because they had special equipment mounted on top of the tank that allowed the pulling cables for a sledge not to foul the rear of the tank when it was turning. That sledge contained essential supplies to replenish the tanks when needed during the battle, and in the case of Cambrai that would probably be fuel. So these tanks would also be called up when required to replenish the battalion. Each one of these tanks having a sledge, towing a sledge behind with tins of fuel. So here we have then the full allocation of tanks to B Battalion, 46 in total.